This episode of the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy is brought to you by
The feeling of dread.
Dread. It's no longer just for nightmares. Today it is also for the state of the world and global politics.
Yes, from wars overseas to rampant collusion and corruption in politics, dread is now an essential part of daily living.
I, for one, use Dread to fuel my research.
And it's useful when doom scrolling on your social media apps of choice.
So why not try Dread today? You won't enjoy it, but it will permeate your very sense of self.
But wait, there's more. Cue the intro. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Edison and M. Dentith. Hello and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy in Auckland, New Zealand. I am Josh Edison. In Guangzhou, China, they are Associate Professor M.R.X. Dentith. When last we heard, you were in the same country as me, and now you're not. How did that work out? How did certain geopolitical happenings affect your international travel?
So I left before the fuel crisis became a major issue, because I imagine that's putting the price of flights up dramatically around the world. And B, flying from Auckland to Guangzhou did mean avoiding many sites of war along the way. It's almost the perfect pathway to avoiding global conflict at this time. So getting here was not an issue. But as I was talking about with a friend last night, getting back at any point could start to become quite problematic, because those fuel costs are going to drive an increase in air flight prices, and those air flight prices are going to mean that fewer people are going to travel, and God knows what things are going to look like in a year's time.
Although I understand China is leading the world in solar power and electric vehicles, so they just need to invent some electric passenger planes. Just as simple
I
as
believe
that.
there is work going on for battery-powered planes, which is going to be interesting because, as you know, you're not meant to take lithium batteries into the cabin of a aircraft. When the aircraft itself is a giant lithium battery, will that still apply? I don't know, Josh. I'm not paid the big bucks.
No. Well, that's for the future. When this episode, of course, is very much about the now. Or the couple of weeks ago, I guess. It's been a few weeks, what with your travels and all of that business, since we've had a proper episode. So I'm pretty sure at the time we last recorded an episode, Epstein-y business was starting to happen. But this is our first chance to really have a good talk about it. And so that's what
And our timing is kind of good, because the Department of Justice in the United States has said, that's it. There are no more Epstein files to be released. So what we have is technically all we're going to get. Now, that doesn't mean that more files won't get released, because some of the files were, of course, leaked by Democratic members of Congress before the official release by the Department of Justice in the United States. There's also the distinct possibility that the investigations of Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten in the UK may lead to the disclosure of more information, because the government of the UK is likely to be asking the Department of Justice for additional files relating to Andrew Mountbatten and Peter Mandelson. And if that ends up being in a court of law and being made public, more files might be released. But at the moment, according to the Trump administration in the US, the files we've got are the only files we're going to get.
Right, so then now's the time to talk about them, although beforehand, I suppose we should do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, I understand the plan is that this episode's going to go up on YouTube.
Yes, so I received an email earlier this week from someone from one of those SEO companies that's always trying to upsell you on our service is great, why don't you have as many listeners as you want? And the trick is, we don't want listeners. We've been actively trying to destroy our listenership base for years now. So these emails don't mean anything to us. But it was pointed out in this email that we don't have a YouTube presence. And so our new goal, our agenda for the next year is to build a YouTube presence up and then slowly destroy that as well. So this is going to be an episode which is available as a video. We would recommend. Also, I'm sounding all emotional here because I have something stuck in the back of my throat, but it is making me sound as if this is the most important thing I've ever talked about, Josh. It sounds so emotional now as I'm trying to swallow something that's making me go, ah. We are going to put the episodes up on YouTube. They will not be edited to the standard you expect compared to the audio version of the episode. If you think the audio episodes are not edited well, just watch the YouTube ones.
Watch the YouTube ones. Yeah.
See what is left in, the awkward pauses, the verbal tics that we edit out. So yes, these will be going up on YouTube. If you want to watch us, watch our lovely faces online, it is going to be available.
Yeah, now I should say we used to have a YouTube presence in the early days of this podcast. We did. Em would edit the audio version, and then I would edit the video version and chuck it up on my YouTube channel. And it fairly quickly proved to be not worth the effort because compared to the amount of people who were listening to the podcast, the numbers, the views we'd get on the YouTube episodes were tiny, except for one. And we'll get back to that soon.
We will get back to that.
So
possibly our biggest episode ever.
Possibly, but so one particular episode aside, it became clear eventually that it was just not worth the effort of editing and putting up a YouTube every time. So now we're going to go for a halfway solution where we are putting up an episode on YouTube, but we're not going to put any effort into it whatsoever.
I mean, there'll be a modicum of effort. There'll be
we'll stick a title card.
We'll put the music in for the intro and the outro, but that basically is all you're going to get.
Yeah. So yes, if you're listening to this in your usual podcasting listening apparatus, and you'd like to see our face, you'd like to watch me drinking from this cup of yellow liquid that might be Mountain Dew, might be something else.
Although, given the amount of Mountain Dew you drink, it could be something else, and it would look exactly like Mountain Dew.
Yeah.
You could be a Fremen, and you're just recycling your Mountain Dew and drinking it again.
Yeah, I get one of those still suit things. It'll be great. So that's that. The other bit of housekeeping is now, I'm very old. Em, you're very old, but not as old as me, but I'm very old. Old enough that the webcomic project I had when I was young and the stars still shone brightly in the skies turned 20 years old this month. And I thought a fun thing to do would be to start doing it again. So I have. So that's... I'm always a little bit hesitant to spring on people. The name of it is a webcomic called Monkey Fluids. Now, if you know me, if you follow me on any social media, if you've seen my email, you know Monkey Fluids is a phrase I use a lot. I found springing it on people unannounced can raise eyebrows. But if you go to monkeyfluids.com, you will see for a limited time only brand new comic thingies by me. It's not, when I say comics, I did the old thing of taking old-timey pictures and putting amusing and irreverent captions on them. I wasn't the first to do it, I wasn't the last to do it, but I did do it, and it was fairly well received. And I'm doing it again.
He is doing it again, and he's doing it with gusto.
Yep. So that's my plug, monkeyfluids.com. Go have a look. Right. I think that's the housekeeping out of the way.
Yeah, that is all the preamble. Let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein.
Let's amble. Now, see, that's a clap where we would then edit in a little sting sound effect to transition from the main bit to the rest of the episode. But on YouTube, I think you can just suck it. You can just take our extraneous claps, unedited.
But Josh, you're now introducing unique content to the YouTube version of the episode that podcast listeners do not have access to. This makes this a very
Ooh.
special presentation of the podcaster's guide to the conspiracy, and also now means that my original plan to maybe edit the claps out has to now, we now have to leave the claps in.
Oh
Otherwise,
yeah. Oh
what's the
yeah.
point of this particular bit of verbiage we're engaging in?
Exactly. So, this ends the YouTube exclusive portion of the podcast as we get into the main topic.
Oh, Josh does this every single time we start a new segment. He clears his throat,
I
and
do.
then the magic comes out.
Got to clear your throat. Yes, so Epstein. I mean, he's been everywhere. He's probably been he's been more in the public consciousness now than he ever was while he was alive. Although he was fairly notorious for a while he was alive as well. But there's been no shortage of talking about him for various fairly good reasons, and especially good reasons if you're a podcast that likes to talk about conspiracy theories. So I guess the first thing we can talk about are the actual conspiracy theories around Jeffrey Epstein and what effects, if any, the latest releases and leaks have had. I mean, certainly people seem more likely to believe that he didn't commit suicide now, don't they?
They do. So when Epstein died, under what can only be called mysterious circumstances in prison several years ago, there were a number of conspiracy theories being put forward. So just to give you a short gloss as to what happened, Jeffrey Epstein was in prison. He was on suicide watch. He commits suicide. People started to question the official narrative about Epstein's suicide for the sheer fact that there were some oddities. He was on suicide watch, but people were not checking up on him on a regular interval, which you're meant to do when someone's on suicide watch. The cameras operating outside of his cell were not functioning properly. The body was found quite some time after death had been declared. And then it turned out that prior to Jeffrey Epstein's apparent suicide, Epstein had complained that his cellmate, an ex police officer who was in prison for murder, had tried to murder him in his cell. So many people were going, I mean, it might be the case that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide, but at the same time, there's something fishy about the way the story is being told of his suicide, which led to some people saying it could be so fishy as to say that maybe he didn't commit suicide at all, maybe he was murdered.
Yes, and it should be pointed out that there are a range of possibilities and positions people can have on this. It's often presented as either he killed himself completely independently and not suspiciously at all, or he was bumped off in his cell by the CIA and he was actually assassinated and this was covered up. But there are a range of possibilities, and he could have been convinced fairly strongly that he should commit suicide. He could have committed suicide, and the cover-up is around the fact that the people who are supposed to be watching him were just plain incompetent. It could be a cover-up of incompetence rather than of a malicious, an assassination type theory. So there are a range of positions in between 100% suicide, unsuspicious suicide, and flat out murder. But nevertheless, the he just plain committed suicide end of the spectrum seems to be becoming, if not less plausible, a lot less widely believed, I guess.
Yes, and the reason why I use the term apparent suicide is that this is a term that's been used by the media now when people are reporting on Jeffrey Epstein's death. Certain media outlets are now appending apparent in front of suicide, which I think shows a kind of mainstreaming of the we're not entirely sure he died at his own hands aspect of the argument. So yeah, it's interesting, and of course, what's made it particularly salient to talk about conspiracy theories is that now people are going, well, these Epstein files, they're fairly good evidence that there were people out there that Epstein had compromise on who really would have liked him to have died before he went to trial.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's it's definitely gathering traction, but I don't know that we have any. As you say, we have a lot more motive now, but I don't know that we have any more evidence, any more
Well, so
tangible
the
evidence.
evidence that I've seen being discussed online, there's a YouTube mortician who has spent several videos now looking at all of the official photos and footage of Epstein's corpse. And she is adamant that there is something wrong with those photos and that they look staged and they don't look natural. Although I'm not quite sure how a person being dead looks natural at all. It's kind of one of the definitions of being dead. It's an unnatural state for a living being. But there is a YouTube mortician who has been making claims that all of the photos we have don't look like a corpse. It looks like someone who's been dressed up as a corpse or someone who has been dressed up to look like they committed suicide as opposed to being murdered. Now, there are critiques of this particular YouTube mortician. Many people are saying that her critiques are not particularly well done. They're more salacious than they are factual. And they have pointed out that many of the stories she tells about her so called expertise as a mortician seem to be stories she has laundered from her father's career as a mortician. But there are people who are looking at the photos of Epstein's corpse and the footage surrounding the movement of that corpse and going, well, this doesn't look quite right.
Mm. And the thing is, these particular claims tie into both the idea that he didn't commit suicide because he was murdered, and also the other theory going around at the moment, which is completely the opposite, which says those images of his death look staged because he's not dead at all. Because the other one that's now popping up is Jeffrey Epstein. Not only did he not commit suicide, he's still alive and in hiding, and yet, despite being in hiding, still managing to get photographed all over the place. So we've seen a bit of we've seen this with Steve Jobs, we've seen this with Tupac Shakur. It must have happened with a bunch of other people as well. That all these photographs start popping off of a person in a public place, and people will say, "Doesn't that look an awful lot like that guy who's supposed to be dead?" And so there have been photographs of a man who is allegedly Jeffrey Epstein. I think there was some photographs of a person in Israel. The one photographs I saw, I'm pretty sure, were the celebrity Mickey Rourke with long hair and a beard,
Who is
they
also
claimed,
dead.
well, but nevertheless,
Or
is
I
it
should
Jeffrey
say,
Epstein?
is he dead?
Mm.
I
And
mean, maybe
supposedly,
Mickey Rourke is also faked his own death. Maybe they're hanging out together in Tel Aviv.
being body doubles for each other. Apparently, I have not seen any of these, but I'm told that there are also AI generated images going around of an alive Jeffrey Epstein hanging out in places. So I'm not aware of anything credible about this. And as I say, it's a thing we've seen plenty of other times with other celebrities who have. Well, it's a celebrity? Is that the right word? I guess public figure, certainly.
Yeah, public figure is probably the better term to use for
Celebrity
Jeffrey
has more
Epstein.
positive connotations, yeah. But then another thing that popped up was in the Epstein files, leaks, whatever you want to call them, releases. One thing that was released was the username that Jeffrey Epstein used when he was playing Fortnite online. And then after his death, people noticed that username popping up. There was someone was playing Fortnite with that username after Jeffrey Epstein was supposedly dead, and people this certainly raised a few eyebrows. Now, as I understand it, what actually happened was somebody read that Jeffrey Epstein's username was this, then changed their own username to that as a bit of a laugh, and started playing under that username to get precisely the sort of reaction that got. But as I understand, there isn't actually. It is all quite explainable that Jeffrey Epstein's username was being used in Fortnite after he died.
And you, like many other people, and so to you, to the viewer here or the listener, might be surprised to find out that Jeffrey Epstein played Fortnite. But one of the
Lots of
things which
people
is
did.
and one of the things which has kind of come out from the Epstein files is that Epstein wasn't a man of particularly high class. Now, I'm not going to make the claim that playing computer games is a lower class activity in the derogatory sense, but Jeffrey Epstein was, in many respects, a lot more ordinary than you might expect someone of his extreme wealth to be.
Yes, yes. No, I think that that does come across quite clearly. Now, of course, the other big theory going around at the moment involving the Epstein files is that the current attacks on Iran are all there to distract us from the release of the Epstein files, especially since I think it was either just before or just after the initial attacks by the USA and Israel on Iran. Um, it came out that there was evidence of or testimony of Trump himself having some form of relations with an underage girl and then assaulting her afterwards. And that disappeared fairly quickly. And so people have said, oh, okay, well, here we go. That's it. He knew the bad stuff was coming out about him. So he started an entire war to take the heat off it. And I mean, what do you think of that as a theory?
I mean, this is one of the problems about talking about anything about President Donald J. Trump, in that you can put malign, very, very intentional activity behind Trump's decisions. Or you can think he's just someone who does what he's thinking at any particular time. So, yeah, it is a possibility that the Trump administration went, what's the best way to avoid talking about the Epstein files? Let's go to war instead. But there's also a very distinct possibility, and I suspect probably a more likely one, that Trump has been goaded by hawks and his administration that they need to do something about the Iranian regime, and it's just conveniently timed at the same time the Epstein files are becoming more and more prominent in public discourse. So, yeah, sure. Maybe it's a distraction. But largely, I think Trump does what Trump wants to do, or at least Trump does what Trump is told to do, and then takes ownership of those decisions because he's the cleverest boy in the room.
Yes, yeah, I kind of agree. I don't think it's so much that the Trump administration started a pointless war in Iran because they wanted to distract from the Epstein files. They've started a pointless war in Iran, and it is distracting from the Epstein files. But really, when you look at this administration and the previous Trump administration, the entire history of them seem to be doing a stupid thing, which then distracted from the previous stupid thing they'd just done, and on and on and on like that. So,
And it's
yeah, I do.
not as if the Republicans haven't been eager for a war with Iran for a while now, anyway. I mean, this reminds me a lot of some of the discussions around 9/11 conspiracy theories. So, the argument that America had to engineer the 9/11 attacks to then justify going to war in the Middle East. And sure, that is a possibility. But given that America has at least, sorry, certain right wing Republicans have wanted a war in the Middle East since time immemorial, there's also a very distinct and I think more likely possibility that 9/11 was simply the justification to do something they wanted to do anyway. And that gives us avenue to talk about a kind of sideline, because we're not really talking about Iran here. But one of
No.
the things which came out last week was that senior brass in the American military have been telling good old infantry and service personnel that they need to go to war in the Middle East to bring about the kingdom of heaven.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this has been a thread that's been going around for quite a while. But there's certain strains of Christianity really want the apocalypse to happen because that's when Jesus comes back, and they believe that this will happen with a war in the Holy Land in the Middle East, and they're doing their damnedest to engineer one. And it's I guess, yeah, the frightening thing at the moment is people actually saying it out loud, kind of officially, whereas it had
Mm.
always sort of
Yeah,
been,
it's no
separation
longer.
of church and
Yeah.
state stuff. Yeah.
Yes, it's no longer something that they whisper about behind closed doors. It's something they're actually telling the troops.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's a worry, but not, as you say, specifically related to the Epstein files, which is what we're talking about this particular episode. So, I mean, that's a bit of a survey of how Epstein-related conspiracy theories have been swirling around before, during, and after the release of these files. But I think there's an interesting question that applies more specifically to this podcast, and it's one that was brought up by that YouTube video we mentioned at the start of the episode. And that was the time we did an episode on Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory. This was a theory. A young person. I actually forget. They were. Uh, they were transgender and first went by one name and then went by a different name, and I forget which is the current one, and I don't want to give them the wrong name at the moment, but they had put up a series of videos claiming that they themselves had been a victim of what they called Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, which was basically every sort of satanic elite cabal conspiracy mashed together. There was this base somewhere in Texas near Fort Worth, which has had a fair few conspiratorial happenings around it already, where children were abducted and taken and tortured and murdered and cannibalized and sort of shipped out for consumption by other evil elite cabals and so on and so forth. And that one video where we talked about Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory was the only one that ever got and continues to get hits on it. And that seems to be because we're the only people who've ever actually talked about it, apart from the person putting up the... Actually, let's look, because I went and had a look back at our old videos. We talked about this once, and then
we talked about it twice, because we did a follow-up one.
That's what I'm saying. We talked about it once, and then when that was getting all the hits, we went back and did a follow-up. And in that follow-up, we mentioned that at the time, when you Googled Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, the top results were all our one podcast episode. Now, I'm Googling right now. Okay, Reddit. Okay, no, it's a little bit... We're now the third mentioned from the top. I'm seeing a Reddit thing about it, which might be the original Reddit post that you first saw, which got us onto it. We've got a Substack conspiracy newsletter. We've got us. Okay, we've got Katie Groves, that I am assuming that is her current name. She is now the fourth. Then we have us, Twitter post, Substack, us again. Okay, yes. So we're on the first page of results.
I'm looking at DuckDuckGo, and it's a slightly different layout here. So you have the Reddit thread, then you have a Brighteon page by Katie Groves. I don't know what Brighteon is.
Yes, yeah, that was the one I saw. Yep.
Yeah. Then there's a German Substack article on this. Then there's a link to a Twitter/XCOM post. Then there is a book written by Katie Groves for sale on Amazon. Then we get sawglobal.com, which has a post about Katie Groves. And then we get our references on YouTube and then various podcast disseminators. So that's interesting. And I'm now looking at the Uncle Sam's paperback, released September 10th, 2023, by one Dr. Marcel Polte, Polte. And this appears to be it's a 242-page discussion of Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory, and it does seem they've used remote viewers to confirm Katie Groves' experiences. I kind of feel we might need to look at this book.
Yes, but nevertheless, the point is that even though we first talked about this in June of 2019, what's that, 6.5 years ago, we're still in the top page of results for this topic. So we do seem to be one of the very few people talking about it, which I guess is why our YouTube video on it still gets hits. And one of those hits was just the other day, or I suppose a couple of weeks ago now, in between our recording our last episode and recording this one, a person with the username Nicholas Paul put a comment on that video saying, "You guys got to do a follow-up because obviously of the Epstein files. Did your guys' opinions change at all? Great podcast, by the way. Thank you, Nicholas Paul." And that's an interesting question.
It is, isn't it?
Because this is something that has come up in your literature and the conspiracy theory literature a bunch of times. How plausible you think conspiracies are is, according to some people's writing, in some part, determined by how conspired you think the world is. And obviously, it applies differently to different people in different times and different places. But just as a general level of background conspiracy theory, when the Edward Snowden leaks came out, that suddenly showed a whole lot of people that the world was actually more conspired than they thought it was. And now the Epstein files seem to be having the same effect all over again, as we've seen just how chummy all these elite people are and how closely they communicate with each other, and the sorts of things they communicate about. So it's probably too soon for it to have had any influence on the actual academic literature, I'm assuming. But has it
Yes, I
coloured
mean
the
there's going to
conversation?
be a kind of a 6 month lead in
Mm.
between the files coming out to the end of last year and the beginning of this year, and people starting to write on it. And certainly, when it comes to polling on these things, we probably will only have reliable data about this in about a year's time. So we're on the cutting edge here about talking about how this might change how people look at conspiracy theory.
Mm. Have you had any just like conversations or anything recently around this
I mean,
in an
certainly with
academic
academics I
context?
have talked about this with, have all gone, well, there are certain formerly thought to be implausible conspiracy theories that do seem a lot more plausible in the light of what's been released in the Epstein file tranches. So here's an example. It has been postulated for a very long time that the ultra rich really would like to eradicate poor people in general. And people have always kind of defended against this idea by going, look, don't be so stupid. They're not that idiotic to want to wipe out poor people, except that we now have email correspondence between, say, Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Gates, where they are making claims about what can we do about the problem of poor people existing. Now, a spanner in the work here is that the problem with emails is we don't really know what tone is being expressed in these particular conversations. And there are quite obviously some emails that Jeffrey Epstein sent, which were sent in a more jocular mode, but can be read in a very sinister mode. So there's a email that's sent by Jeffrey Epstein to some financier whose name I cannot recall offhand. This financier is visiting New York. Epstein goes, "Oh, if you're in New York, why don't you, Woody, and I meet up for dinner, or would having two pedos at dinner be too much?" And that does appear to be Jeffrey Epstein making a joke at his expense and possibly Woody Allen's expense as well. Or, conversely, if you don't read it in a jocular mode, a recognition that the relationship between Woody Allen and, if not So Ying, his wife, and Mira Phillip.
Mia,
What
Mia
Mia
Farrow. Yep.
Mia Farrow's adopted daughter was inappropriate, or maybe a reference to the claims of historical child abuse that Woody Allen is currently suffering from. It's hard to know whether Epstein is joking or making a serious point at that stage. And thus, because you don't know what tone those emails were written in, we only have the written document after the fact. Maybe some of the comments made in the Epstein files are more humorous than they are serious. But at the same time, they are evidence that people were talking about some of the things that people suspected they had been talking about the entire time.
Yes, I mean, I had seen exchanges along the lines of, it's lucky that the poor people are fighting each other. If they all actually started paying attention to us and working against us, we'd be in trouble. But so good thing they're too busy, too distracted by celebrities and celebrity beefs and other stuff that doesn't involve us. Certainly, people have sort of said, you may not think you're in a class war, but rich people do, and they're winning. Um, so it's definitely been eye opening in one way or another to see the sorts of exchanges, the way. I mean, I've listened to stuff about how Jeffrey Epstein was sort of at the center of, well, was at least involved in a whole bunch of aspects of what has become modern life, as far as loot boxes and video games and stuff like that. I think there was there seemed to be behind it all a real push to the sort of Peter Thiel kind of who's the Mencius Moldbug guy.
Oh, yes.
It's
Yeah,
not Yudkowsky,
the
it's the other
so-called
one.
intellectual of the American
Mm.
right.
But
Curtis
these
Yarvin.
Curtis Yarvin, yes, these guys who all want to get rid of democratic society as it currently exists and replace it with sort of a series of corporate fiefdoms where they would be the absolute ruler of all they surveyed. And you can see a whole bunch of efforts towards that, the whole sort of video gamification of things, and sort of loot boxes as a way leading into cryptocurrency as a way to get rid of government backed currency, and
I
then
mean,
yeah, a
even the
big.
Gamergate phenomena
Mm,
has roots in the Epstein files. So we've now got fairly good evidence that Epstein and his mates were quite keen on promoting the Gamergate hypothesis that there was systemic corruption in gaming journalism, in part because one of the goals of Epstein and his pals was to kind of wind back liberal attitudes towards women and queer people in society. And so things like Gamergate were the kind of things they were getting behind and pushing behind closed doors.
yes, and it seemed Epstein did take sort of a lurch even further, really hardcore in this direction after his initial arrest and conviction the first time, because and yeah, a large part of the project does seem to be that the problem. The problem with me having sex with underage girls is that I get caught because they're able to complain about it, and people will believe them. What we need to do is change society so that, yes, women go back to being property, and nobody listens to what they say. That would be great for me, specifically Jeffrey Epstein. Um, and it's actually been interesting. The whole, I mean, yes, obviously the whole thing of Epstein is the underage sex thing. That's what that's what's synonymous with Jeffrey Epstein. It's underage sex and organizing it for other rich people. Indeed, I've heard
Child trafficking.
the way I've heard that they talk about, supposedly, I have not trawled through the Epstein files in any great detail, but I've read from people who have, who sort of say, yeah, they kind of talk about underage sex the way other people talk about taking drugs. You know, it's it's illegal, but it's just a thing you do at a party. Come on. I also have found it interesting. One of the few cases where there's the whole pedophile or phebophile thing, and when someone gets accused of being a pedophile, and then someone will say, well, technically pedophilia is prepubescent children, and a phebophilia, whereas this person had sex with people who are under the age of legal consent but still past puberty, and that's a phebophilia. And when you say that, it basically just makes it sound like you're being a pedantic dick to in some way defend a person from being a pedophile, as though what they did was in some way okay. And yet, in this case, it almost does seem worth observing that distinction, but specifically because you hear a lot of people criticizing it, saying, yes, Epstein, all these people, they're having sex with children, just little kids, having sex with little kids. And it's like, well, actually, a lot of the time they were having sex with teenagers. It's still bad, it's still illegal, but it's not what you're saying. But the reason why you want to say that is that there are actually large sections of society who think, 14-year-olds, it's not that bad. There are places in the English-speaking world where I think marriage at that age is allowed with parental consent or something. There are chunks of society who don't want to say, that evil Epstein was busy having sex with 14 and 15-year-olds, because they actually kind of think that's okay, which is why they emphasize that, they were just little kids, even in cases where they weren't. It's a very strange situation where I find myself almost agreeing with the pedantic assholes, but not for the reasons they'd want me to.
Yes, because as you were pointing out, there have been quite a lot of media commentators who are going, well, let's not get too antsy about what Epstein was up to, because these were 14-year-olds, not 8-year-olds. And in the case of A girl is a girl. And the whole point of an adult woman is that actually an adult woman is a woman. You don't need to put adult woman in front of it. A woman is a woman. When they're not a woman, they're a child.
Mm,
And that's the problematic aspect. Epstein was trafficking in children. Now, children is a long age range, but it's wrong no matter how young or old they are. If they're not consenting adults, you don't have sex with them.
mm. And yet, despite the wide evidence of all this child trafficking, I can't say, returning to user Nicholas Paul's question, that the Epstein files have actually changed my opinion on Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory. Because when you look at what these guys are doing, it is quite banal in a way. They're not. What were some of the claims of Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory? Boiling children alive in fecal matter, chopping them up in butchery shops and feeding them to other children, worshipping the devil. They just want to get drunk and have parties and have sex with quote unquote woman, not actually caring about the legality of whether or not they are of legal age. Um, I think the Epstein files, yes, show the world is a lot more conspired perhaps than we thought, and really show, there are these, I don't know if cabal is the right word, but there are these elite rich people do get together and they do plot to affect the world that you and I live in. But it also does show that they're not Satan worshipping cannibals, they're just horny assholes.
Yes, I mean, it is a kind of interesting distinction here in that, on one level, the Epstein files does raise the probability that conspiracy theories about rich elites are more likely to be true than we thought they were previously, which is not to say they're more likely to be true. It's that we've raised the probability from, in some cases, deeply improbable hypotheses to things that we should plausibly look at and investigate with due seriousness. But there's still a class of conspiracy theory, like the Uncle Sam snuff factory hypothesis of children being butchered for snuff films, where you go, I don't know the Epstein files have made those any more likely to be true, but it
Hmm.
has made lesser versions of those hypotheses that rich elites are trafficking children for their own wants and desires. We already knew that was somewhat true, given things like Jimmy Savile in the UK
Mm-hmm.
and Epstein's first arrest and conviction all the way back in 2009. We just now know that there were a lot more people who, A, were engaged in helping Epstein, and B, and this is the crucial part, a lot more people who post 2009 were happy to continue to associate with Epstein and want to go to parties on his island.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, the interconnectedness, I guess, of what is now being called the Epstein class, which I don't actually have a problem with, has been very interesting. But also as interesting is how these are the people who run the world. I think it's fair to say, who have enormous power and influence. They're not actually smarter and wiser and in any way better than any of the rest of us, I think. And indeed, sometimes they come across as kind of dumb.
And I think I made this point the last time we talked about the Epstein files, but the thing which the Epstein files should definitely crush is the idea that rich people are better and smarter than the rest of us. Because not only do we have Epstein's emails, we also have the emails of the people he was corresponding with. And these indicate that a lot of these rich and successful people are deeply stupid human beings who've only got into positions of power and wealth because of the luck that drives the economic system under which we live. They're not clever people. They are simply people who have lucked into the right connections or lucked onto an idea which sold at a particular time. They're not clever. they're not smart, and in fact, in many cases, they appear to be very, very deeply stupid individuals.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to be fair, a lot of them are good. Like a fellow like Elon Musk is really good at selling Elon Musk. He
And
doesn't.
taking credit for other people's
Mm,
ideas.
yes, he's genuinely skilled. Bill Gates. Everything I've heard about Bill Gates is he's genuinely a very intelligent person. Um,
But with very few to no social skills.
Yes, and indeed, being very intelligent made him very good in the computer software industry, but doesn't necessarily mean he's actually very good at any other field he might want to turn his hand to. So yeah, a lot of these people they're fairly average people, and yet, as we say, they still do actually run the world. Like that's not an obstacle to them getting pretty much everything they want.
And this makes me think of the French Revolution. So, one of the things which came out in the kind of transition from the Ancien regime to what ended up being the glorious First French Republic was that for a period of time, the bourgeoisie thought that the nobles and the elites of French culture were clever and looking after the interests of the people. And then books were published about the way the royal court worked, and these books revealed that actually it was simply a series of favors where everyone was looking after themselves, and they were doing things for their own benefit, whilst talking about the benefit of the common folk. And this led to the French Revolution, a disillusionment with the ruling class, and the realization that these people were not better. They were not better. They couldn't run a country effectively. In fact, they were making things worse through their interactions rather than keeping things even in a kind of status quo mode. And I think the Epstein files is very similar to what happened with the kind of transition from the Ancien regime to the first glorious French Republic. And that this is an insider's look into how the elites view the world and interact with one another. And it is in no way an edifying look at what is going on behind the scenes.
Yes, which also has come in at the right time, possibly when AI has been the big technology, which is in the past, Silicon Valley has said, here's the stuff that's going to change the world. It's social media, it's iPhones, it's all sorts of stuff like that. AI, from what I understand, is a good tool for certain jobs, but it's being marketed as the best tool for everything that's going to change everything. And there's a public backlash against it in a way that there hasn't been against other technologies to come out in more recent times. So yeah, it did seem like a bit perfect stormy to have from multiple fronts people coming to the realization that, hey, actually these people who are at the top of the heap kind of only have their own interests at heart and maybe a little bit rubbish.
Hmm.
So it's kind of depressing, really, when you get down to it. But I think that's about all we've got. I suppose. I mean, we should say, like you mentioned these the revelations in these Epstein files have resulted in action in the UK, but as far and elsewhere in Europe. But as far as I can tell, nothing has affected anyone in the United States as a
Now, the
result of this
Department of
stuff.
Justice claims that there are investigations ongoing. And some people are treating that as being true. Others are saying, well, they can say there are investigations which are ongoing, but whether that's actually true is another matter entirely. So it is possible there could be investigations and then convictions based upon the Epstein files that could take several years to go through the courts before we find anything out about them. But it is notable that many of the self identifying victims of Epstein and Epstein's associates are making the claim that, as far as they're aware, there's no action going on to actually bring people to justice for what happened.
Hmm. So maybe that will change. Be nice to think so, I suppose. But otherwise, yeah, that's where we just have to leave it, I think.
For the time being, yes.
Yes. So that is where we will leave it. Now, uh, we mentioned that people who are watching the YouTube version of this might get a less polished, less edited version of the podcast than you listeners will. They will, however, get the occasional little interstitial bits where we stop and say, "Oh, maybe we should edit something out or leave a gap to put something in," which you listeners will not be privy to. So maybe you should go listen to the YouTube video and watch it
Although,
also.
if you listen to YouTube video and well, actually, no, this works. We're trying to get rid of listeners. If we can move them to the video version instead,
And
that
then
means we're
kill the
getting our
video
numbers
version.
down. Yeah. Oh, this is all part of our grand plan.
Yes. However, if you're watching on YouTube, you're not going to get the bonus episode that we're going to go and record in a minute, because that's going to be audio only for our beloved patrons.
Who are
And
the best and the
they
brightest
are.
individuals of all time?
I'm 100% certain that none of our patrons are in the Epstein files. I'm so certain I'm not even going to bother checking, because there's just no way.
Do you know what your Epstein number is?
No.
I can tell. I can guarantee it's at least a 2 because I'm a 1.
Does that mean-
Your Epstein number is if you how direct a line of correspondence you have to someone who is in the Epstein files.
Right. So someone who's in the Epstein files is a 0.
Yeah.
And if you have corresponded with someone who is in
So
the
I
Epstein
corresponded with Michael Shermer, who's in the Epstein files. That's why I have a 1. You've
So
corresponded
I'm at
with
least
me.
a 2 then. Yes, I don't think.
I mean, you might also be a 1. There's a possibility you've had correspondence with someone who's had direct correspondence. I unfortunately have. And you've corresponded with me, so you inherit my link.
I'm at least a 2. Yeah, unless, I don't know, unless David Icke, who we've spoken to in person, unless he's in the files.
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, let's just check to see whether David Icke is in the Epstein files.
I mean, he's been a vocal opponent of anything Epsteinish, but then, I mean, simply being in the Epstein files, there could be. It's entirely possible that there are emails of people saying, "Hey, have you heard of this David Icke guy?"
Well, apparently, I've got on Planet Today, conspiracy author David Icke repeatedly named and shamed in new Jeffrey Epstein files. Disgraced conspiracy author David Icke has been named and shamed at least 15 times in Congress's latest release of the Jeffrey Epstein files, the very documents that peel back the curtain on the financier's global pedophile network.
Named and shamed, or just named?
I'm trying to work out whether there is anything which substantiates the headline here.
Oh, well.
Oh, apparently his ex-wife has been dropping disturbing allegations about David Icke.
Ooh, Well, in any case, yes, I'm at the very least a 2, and pending more investigation into David Icke, maybe a 1.
Yeah. So this article is suggesting that he's had at least correspondence with Jeffrey Epstein. So that's interesting.
But then our patrons, rather, who have corresponded with us, are therefore at possibly a 2 or a 3 if they've only ever corresponded with me but not you. But that's definitely no lower than that. 100% no lower than that. Definitely not. And so we are going to be talking to our patrons about a few current events and interesting things that have popped up. One of which has been sent to us by one of our beloved patrons. So there we go. So yes, if you want to become a patron, and you're not currently, just go to patreon.com and look for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. I'd give the actual URL, but it's very long because it involves the words Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. Or actually, even I'm not sure if it is. I think because the title is MRX Dentith and Josh Addison are making, and then the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. Anyway, search for it, you'll find it, sign yourself up, you can be a patron, you'll get bonus episodes which won't get on YouTube. That is the moral of the story.
And what a moral it turned out to be.
Exactly. So, with that ringing in your ears, I think it's time to go. I think it's time to call things to a close, and I will do so.
Toodly pip.
Goodbye. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy features Josh Addison and Associate Professor M.R.X. Dentith. Our producers are a mysterious cabal of conspirators known as Tom, Philip, and another who is so mysterious that they remain anonymous. You can contact us electronically via podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or join our Patreon and get access to our Discord server. Or don't, I'm not your mum. And remember, a bird in the hand will probably peck you in the face. Leave birds alone.